A few years ago, the village of Canton tried an experiment. It set up a food waste pilot program for residents. The goal was to help divert food scraps away from landfills and make opportunities for composting that waste. But today, the big dumpster for the scraps is filled with bees and flies and garbage and hasn't been picked up in weeks. What went wrong on today's story of the day?
Support for Story of the Day comes from Claxton Hepburn Medical Center, dedicated to providing patient care and regional services to the people of St. Lawrence County. claxtonhepburn.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Thursday, August 31st. First up, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand was in Lake Placid yesterday to tour the Olympic Museum. That museum and many other Olympic facilities got major upgrades in recent years as part of a $1 billion investment from New York State. Emily Russell reports.
Even before you enter the Olympic Museum in Lake Placid, you get to see a massive piece of memorabilia from the 1980 Winter Games. There's a 12-foot-tall scoreboard that shows the U.S. with 4 goals and the USSR with 3. It's from the 1980 Miracle on Ice hockey game, when the American men defeated the Soviets. Standing in front of the scoreboard on Wednesday, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand led a patriotic chant. USA! Gillibrand herself was a teenager living in the Albany area at the time of the 1980 Olympics, but her parents were here in Lake Placid for the games.
I remember them calling home every night telling us exactly what they witnessed that day and how cold it was and whether it was snowing.
One detail they couldn't explain over the phone was what it was like inside the rink when the American men defeated the Soviets during that historic hockey game. Gillibrand's parents were here in the stands watching firsthand.
I didn't know anything about the hockey game until my parents came back and said, we won, and told us all about it. It was very exciting.
The legacy of those games is on display inside the Olympic Museum just across the hall from this rink. Lake Placid also hosted the 1932 games, so the museum has memorabilia from back then as well.
So that bobsled helmet is circa 1931, but as you can see from this picture here, it quickly evolved into a different type of helmet.
That's Julia Herman. She's the interim director of the Olympic Museum. She showed Gillibrand all the old gear and clothing from the different games. The museum has a big collection of pins, medals, and torches from different Olympics. There are also more interactive features in the museum.
We have the bobsled simulator, which is a big favorite. It kind of shows you what it's like to go down the bob run at Mount Van Hoevenberg. Wow. And then we have our speed skating interactive, which kind of just helps you keep the pace of, what speed skaters do when they race.
Someone asks whether Gillibrand wants to get in the bobsled simulator.
Yeah, okay. If I brought Henry, I'd make him do that.
Henry is Gillibrand's youngest son. She walked through the rest of the exhibits, including an entire section dedicated to the Miracle on Ice hockey game. Near the end of the tour, the museum shifts focus from Lake Placid's history to its more recent legacy and what's to come. As Herman told Gillibrand, a lot of that has to do with hosting other major events.
We held FISU, the World University Games, here in January. We had World Synchronized Skating Championships. We have ECACs here, a whole host of international events. So just showing the world that we're still relevant on the Olympic stage and just continuing that Olympic legacy today.
That Olympic legacy is able to continue because of a $1 billion investment made by New York State in recent years, including an annual subsidy of more than $100 million. Many of the facilities, like the ski jumps, the hockey rinks, and this very museum got big upgrades. Gillibrand said she thinks that kind of continued investment here makes sense.
I think it's essential for the economy. It's also essential for our competitiveness. As you heard at the tour, this facility is training this generation's athletes and next generation's athletes.
Lake Placid is set to host 4 more World Cup events in the coming year, including for luge and ski jumping. As the museum tour ended, Gillibrand was taken through the gift shop and given a bag with pins and an Olympic hat, which she said her sons will fight over.
Well, thank you all for the great tour. Appreciate it very much.
Emily Russell, North Country Public Radio, Lake Placid.
So, the Canton Food Scraps Pilot Program. The goal was to create a path for composting residents' food waste. But now the project is creating more problems than it's solving. Catherine Wheeler has our story.
Bob Washoe cares a lot about compost. He's a farmer and a master composter. And when he was a town board member, he helped the village of Canton launch a food waste pilot program a few years ago. On a warm August day, I asked him to show me around the place where Canton residents can throw away their food scraps. It's a little shed on a hill next to the village's ice skating rink. Big instructional signs are posted over a blue dumpster. Next to it, there's a plastic trash can full of mulch to sprinkle over the scraps. When Washoe raises the dumpster's lid, bees and big black flies buzz out. Inside, there's old corn cobs, banana peels, eggshells, and a plastic bag, along with the mulch.
Well, what I'm seeing here is a dumpster that hasn't been emptied since, by my last record, May.
Washoe says that's a problem because those scraps need to be dumped regularly so they can be turned into compost. He's occasionally checked in on the dumpster to see if that's been happening.
I was monitoring this because I bought into the program. I believed in it. I wanted it to succeed, and wanting something to succeed requires follow-through and tweaking.
But there hasn't been much tweaking, and the program hasn't really worked.
We have had problems with people taking things up to that area and just using the area to dispose of trash and other building supplies.
That's Canton's mayor, Michael Dalton.
In many ways, we'd like to shut that area off so people aren't just throwing out building materials and stuff they can't get rid of.
He says another big problem is vermin and bugs getting into the collection bin. And all of this is taking its toll on the Public Works Department, which is tasked with maintaining the site.
There's been several problems that have come up over time that it's just taking more and more of our time to do. Our employees were shorthanded with our DPW employees.
In the earlier days of the program, the village used to drop off the collected food scraps at Bob Washoe's farm, Little Grass Food Works, where he turned it into compost. Washoe says, yes, he had to pick through and pull out some trash, but that wasn't the big problem. He says in 2022, the Department of Public Works didn't drop off any scraps for months.
So I wrote the village and I said, all you guys got to do is dump it. They promised me on multiple occasions they would dump it once a week. Even if they dumped it twice a week and rinsed it out, that's all it would take.
Washoe says that inconsistent schedule was making it harder to get the food waste to break down properly, so he told the village he'd stop accepting the scraps. Dalton says right now they're temporarily putting the scraps on some village land, but it's not a place where they can take the time to compost it.
It's not our intention that it goes away, but our employees have to be able to do their jobs, and we look at things in a global way, not just a specific item like composting.
But it's not like other towns have figured this out either. According to Compost for Good, a group focusing on community composting in the North Country, there aren't any other municipalities with up-and-running food waste diversion programs in the region, though some are working on plans and getting grant funds. Waste management company Casella is close to getting a food waste pickup program working in Clinton County, but they're targeting restaurants and businesses before they move on to residential areas. So now the village of Canton is trying to figure out what to do next. At a recent village meeting, the board brainstormed new ideas after the Sustainability Committee proposed making some changes to include more oversight and timely collection. One idea included keeping the current site open 1 day a week for a set amount of hours. Trustee Anna Sorensen says with a setup like that, the village could collect some data on how often this service is used and who's using it.
I do think if in order for us to improve it, and figure out what the community needs and how much, and is that something that the village would want to take on in a more than a few months type of pilot, then we need data.
Farmer and former town board member Bob Washoe says working through these issues and learning about what does and doesn't work will be better for the community in the long run.
I think that the North Country just needs to be more resilient, and I think how we deal with national resources is within our control, and we have something that for the longest time has been seen as waste when actually it is something that could go back into feeding us as a community.
The Sustainability Committee is currently working on another proposal for the village board. It could potentially be a short-term plan to see if a new way will be better. Catherine Wheeler, North Country Public Radio, in Canton.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Eddie Lawrence of Moira and Hank Soto of Stony Creek. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.